How's it going, guys? Kevin here. Before we hop into the video with William Allen, I'd just like to encourage you to like the video if you like it, and hit the subscribe button and click the bell if you want to see more interviews like this one. And also, please leave in the comments below if there's any guests you want me to bring onto the channel, or also leave in the comments any topics you want me to cover in these kind of interviews with highly sensitive men in the future. So without further ado, let's hop into the interview. Okay, so how's it going, everyone? My name's Kevin, and we have another great interview coming up in a few moments. And I'm pleased to be joined today by William, or Bill Allen. And he's the author of the new book, Confessions of a Sensitive Man, An Unconventional Defense of Sensitive Man, which is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other bookstores out there. And so I'll be leaving a link to that book in the description below so you guys can check that out. And Bill is a 65-year-old highly sensitive man himself. And so Bill, why don't you just give us a short background about yourself and what you do?
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be on with you talking about this. As you said, I'm 65. I'm sort of semi-retired right now. I had a corporate career for over 30 years with a large bank. I was working in information technology. I've always been a highly sensitive person, but I didn't always know that. And of course, it wasn't until the mid-90s when Dr. Elaine Aron published her book on high sensitivity that it kind of opened up a whole new way of looking at myself, which has really changed my life. I always seen myself as sort of an outlier, being a sensitive man, and always felt like I wasn't meeting up to these masculine expectations and stuff. About 10 years ago, I took an early retirement from the company I was working for, and I decided to pursue what I wanted to do for a living. I took some classes in hypnosis. I set up a small hypnosis practice in Bend, Oregon, and started doing what I call hypno-coaching, working with people sort of with everyday problems, not anything clinical or therapeutic, but things that, like smoking cessation, weight loss, maybe minor anxiety issues, how to relax, reduce stress, that kind of thing. Shortly thereafter, I added neurofeedback training in there, and this company, this little business I had called Brain Pilots was born. I did that for a few years, and then some family circumstances brought me back towards the middle of the United States into Texas. I was helping out a family member. I put the business on hibernation for a while, and I started working on a blog. And the blog was about sensitivity in men. And as I wrote it and continued to write it over a couple of years, I started to realize there was a book in there, and I wanted to take those blog articles and make them into a book. And that's really what has led me to this point right now. Is over the last 2 years or so, I finished the book up. I've self-published it. I've got it out there now, and I'm getting some pretty good feedback on it. I think it resonates with a lot of men especially, but I also have some HSP women who read it and liked it as well. So this has been very encouraging, and I think that's a good thing now, because I really think we need to bring up awareness on high sensitivity in men.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And so if you think, I guess, to the origin of all this, and maybe you can get a bit deeper into like your kind of life trajectory as it arose to discovering the HSP trait in yourself, and kind of how that's been throughout your life. So what kind of led you initially to want to take those leaps into helping HSPs in a variety of ways, whether that be your blog or your hypno-coaching, or now your book?
Well, I think that's a very common trait with highly sensitive people, is being very empathetic and being what I call nurturing, wanting to help people solve problems and issues in their lives. I did that throughout my corporate career. I think that's probably the strongest suit I had, was these characteristics that led me to coach my staff and develop them into being the best they could be. I got the most joy out of that, and I got a lot of positive feedback from them. So when I left corporate America, I wanted to get into doing something that was helpful to people. I had a bachelor's degree in psychology, and at one point in my life, I wanted to be a psychologist or a therapist. But at that age, I didn't want to go back to school. I didn't want to have to go through all that training and certification and everything else. So I took a different path, and I was using the hypnosis as a way of reaching out to people. A lot of my clients came in, didn't know they were highly sensitive. In fact, highly sensitive people are more likely to go out and reach out for help and probably work with therapists more, because we are more in tune with our feelings, and we want some help dealing with those at some time. And so it was easy for people to walk in there not knowing that they were highly sensitive, and after a few discussions, we'd find out they were. So knowing that those people were out there, it started to kind of help frame where I wanted to take myself and the business, and that is to work with and help highly sensitive people, especially highly sensitive young men and boys, because very often they don't know why they're different. They don't know why they're more sensitive, or they're sort of outside of the box when it comes to what our culture typically defines as masculine traits. And it's nice to have somebody to help coach you with that. So that's kind of the direction my coaching career came to, and also why the book was written. I was writing that book more for my younger self, and I'm hoping that that's going to appeal to people that were at that same juncture when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, and trying to figure out life and trying to figure out who I was.
Mm-hmm. And so I think we can get into talking about the book a bit more, because I think you mentioned the book gets into a lot of your personal stories and
Right.
experiences. You described it as like a boots on the ground type of a book on highly sensitive men. So maybe talk about what the book covers. What are some of like the main themes? What can people expect from reading your book?
Right. Well, obviously, I wanted to write a book that shared my experiences, because, frankly, I am not a psychologist or a research psychologist. I wanted to write, like you said, a boots on the ground book, a book about my experiences as growing up as a highly sensitive person, and also how I dealt with various situations in life, whether it was relationships or corporate life, or whatever. So I talk a lot about the traits of sensitivity, what defines a sensitive man, um, what is sensory processing sensitivity, which is the underlying characteristic. Talk about some things that, frankly, nobody else I could see were talking about. Things like behavioral quirkiness about us, things that make us different, and taking an angle on that. Some of the struggles we have as HSMs, highly sensitive men. Talk a little bit too about some of these add-ons that I call them for high sensitivity, like high sensation seeking. Dr. Tracy Cooper has written some great books about that. Being an INFP, INFJ in Myers-Briggs jargon, and also being an introvert, how those kind of things play into being on top of sensitivity, how that affects how I do things and how I live my life. I wanted to talk too about traps that HSMs can fall in, that I've seen myself do, using and abusing substances to try to compensate for this sensitivity and dealing with social situations and things, negative, positive sides of being a highly sensitive person. And certainly one thing that always comes up every time I talk to somebody about high sensitivity is relationships, and what you can expect, and maybe what you should be shooting for. And then I kind of wrap the book up with talking about things like anxiety, depression, and how they affect us differently, maybe a little bit differently. And then probably the most difficult chapter to write, only so far in that I really didn't know how to approach it, was, very often highly sensitive men, because they express more feminine energy than a traditional masculine person that's a non-HSP person. They're always being told, well, are you gay? And what we think of is being gay is being sort of the opposite of the masculine man macho guy that we think of, which is totally a bunch of rubbish. It's unfair to gay men to say things like that. But as a non-gay man who has been, accused of this before, not accused, but certainly labeled this, I wanted to write a chapter about how that affects things and gender identity and things like that. So it was kind of diving into an area that I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge on. I had to do some, then I kind of wrapped the book up with a kind of a chapter on hopefully giving out hope for all HSP men that we're okay, that everything is good, that we need to learn more about the trait and need to educate ourselves more about it and live our lives with our heads up.
Awesome. And I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, but I do like what I hear as it relates to you mentioning that you hit some of kind of those outer edges of the HSP trait, some of the more quirky factors. You mentioned you bring in a bit of the Myers-Briggs personality type in there. I know I talk a lot about that on my channel and how it connects to the HSP trait. And so I think it'll be very interesting to kind of dig into some of those other subtle factors, because the HSP trait, it affects so many areas of life. But I also think, and I've read a number of books on the trait, they tend to be very predictable, and they touch on the does factors, which I think are important to understand. But then it kind of takes you through kind of the general more common problems that an HSP would experience, like overstimulation and I mean, even Tom Falkenstein's book on highly sensitive men, he talks a lot about the self-care strategies, and those are all important. But I think it's also useful to kind of see more the broader experience of what it's like walking through the life of a highly sensitive man. So I think that's something that people can get from your book, and I'll definitely be looking forward to reading it.
Yeah. One of the things I think that I had a little bit more license to do was to take on some of these quirkier topics. Sometimes I think psychologists and people who work in the fields that are in sort of the scientific community want to stay within the paradigm. And I have no problem taking on some of these other things and going down in that area talking. There's probably a lot more that I could have done, but I like the idea that I had a little bit more license to do that. And I proposed a few things in the book that might be a sort of stepping out a bit, but I think it's interesting. And I think, I did enough research to kind of suggest that it might really need some further consideration, especially when it comes to highly sensitive people.
Mm-hmm. And someone who, let's say a highly sensitive man just gets introduced in the trait, he could probably find it helpful to just read The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron, and then eventually branch out into some of these more specialized topics that you cover. So beyond your book, though, you mentioned, I wanted to get into this really quickly, the neurofeedback brain training, because this is something that it's the first time I've heard of someone who does this type of thing to help HSPs. So maybe if you could just touch on a little bit more about what that entails and how it can help an HSP reach like a consistently calm state. Yeah.
Well, let me say this. Neurofeedback is a very broad field. There's a lot of different types of neurofeedback out there. I had used some traditional EEG neurofeedback that seemed to be ponderous and tedious and difficult for the client, difficult for me as a person performing neurofeedback training. I found a Canadian company. I found Zingar, which is out of Victoria, BC, and a psychologist, Dr. Val Brown, his wife Susan Brown. They developed this tool, and it's called Neroptimal, and it is they're sensors that are placed on the head. It's not nearly as complicated as some of the configurations you can get with traditional EEG. But the point of the training is it's very automatic. It's very passive for the person. They don't have to think about anything. They don't have to put themselves in a particular state or anything else. And there's a kind of a dance between the software and the person's brain. The brain is feeding the software, and the software is feeding back information, and it's looking for moments that are perfect for learning something new. So it brings attention to it by playing an audio file and doing an interrupt in it. And your brain picks up that information and can pay attention to these little blips that come up. Now, what I liked about it was the fact that, like I said, it's very passive for the person. And you know, sometimes when people are doing things like meditation, it's a sort of an active kind of ritual. You're having to bring your mind back to a place of kind of calm, neutral. And sometimes that's difficult for people who have lots of things bouncing around their brain. I think a lot of HSPs are like that, a lot of thought activity going on. What this does, this particular tool, is it teaches some resiliency in the brain. In other words, quick recovery time for, say, a stressful situation. You know, a lot of people who have done meditation, who've done this type of training, have said, you know, people who've done it for 10, 15 years have said they wish they had found this tool sooner, because what it took them 10 or 15 years to get to in terms of state, you know, being resilient, being able to recover quickly from things, being able to put themselves in a relaxation state, they could do within a matter of maybe a month or two using this product. So it's very effective. It's very easy to use. It's very easy on the person. Now, the problem with the tool is that it's not cheap. It's not something you could go out and buy, like you could buy mind tools. It's very expensive, but there are people throughout the world who do this as practitioners. And you know, if you went to the Zengar site, you'd be able to find that. But I want to say this on top of having used that tool is, a lot of times we have to develop our own mind hacks. And sometimes it's for people who are looking for something that they can start developing now. There are a lot of apps for phones that you can download that are tools that you can use to do brain entrainment, where they might have different types of sounds that come out, or things that sync your brain to an alpha or theta brainwave state. And one of the things that I was thinking about before we talked today is this idea that you train your brain. It's like body memory, right? When you're learning to do a sport, let's say, for example, golf, it's a very complicated set of motions and activities, positions that your body has to be held. But if you do it repetitively, what happens is your body learns, it becomes a body memory. It's unconscious at that point. And you can go out and play the game of golf or whatever it is you're doing, drive a car or whatever. The same thing can be applied with doing these kind of relaxation techniques. When I was doing hypnosis, one of the first things I realized was when you ask somebody to relax, they didn't know what that meant. You know, you think you understand it, but you have to feel it. You have to experience it in your body and in your mind. So a lot of the time when I was working with people, I had to teach them how to relax. You know, we did some breathing techniques and things like that. I had a really great tool, which we won't go into, but it was a motorized bed that actually put people almost in an alpha brainwave state within 5 minutes. Nothing they had to do. That was an advantage I had. But the point I was trying to make with them is that they could teach themselves what that feeling of relaxation was. And so whenever I would have a second or third or fourth session with them, once they became accustomed to this idea of relaxation, they would immediately go to that relaxed place because they remembered what it felt like. So when I said, be relaxed, they knew my legs kind of feel, you know, spongy, my shoulders are relaxed, my neck is not stressed out, all that kind of stuff. And that's something that we all can learn to do, that is a quick hack for trying to get yourself in a relaxed state, especially for HSPs who tend to be stressed out a lot more because they're feeling and experiencing more. And so I would recommend that people do that. I haven't read Tom's book yet, so I don't know which particular techniques he talked about in there. But it's not as difficult as it sounds. And it does require some repetition, but you don't have to be doing this for 20 years to finally get that state. You know, so I would recommend that people look for something that makes sense to them, that works fairly well. and to learn what that feeling is that inside of you. We're really good about tapping into feelings and knowing feelings and certain states that we have. Once you learn to do that, you can call it on demand when you need it. And it may be as simple as taking 2 or 3 deep breaths, closing your eyes and focusing on that state to get yourself calmed down. But there are lots of techniques out there.
Mm-hmm. So just a follow-up question. If you compare this type of technique to meditation, in what ways would you say that it's maybe more beneficial or just different?
Well, went back in the early 70s, I did transcendental meditation, and I was amazed at how quickly I learned it. I thought, to learn the technique, to get to another level using the technique required years of practice. I mean, there's no shortcut to that. You just have to keep doing the technique over and over again. But at some point you hit a utility for the technique and you start to benefit from the relaxation for doing that technique. The neuroptimal, in my opinion, since I've had a background in meditation and I do know how to relax using meditation, and I've used other things as well, brain entrainment tools and so forth. Really the golden rule here is getting to that state, that alpha theta brainwave state, which is where meditation takes place. It's that calm, relaxed state. What I found with Neuroptimal and tools like Neuroptimal is that they get you there quickly. And there's less of this worry about, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? You'll find yourself in a place where you're relaxed, you're calm, and you can reach it easily. Now, even after a few sessions of doing the Neurooptimal, I found that one day I was out driving and somebody cut me off, and ordinarily I would react, like most people would. And I found that I was going to react, but my brain stopped me. It was like the most amazing thing in the world. Suddenly it just stopped. And I said, you don't need to do that. You don't need to be overreacting. And that's part of that resiliency thing, that your brain starts learning to be more calm and more relaxed. You think more clearly. It's the perfect tool, in my opinion, for highly sensitive people. It's easy, it's passive, and it really does work over time. You start to realize how it is. And using those techniques is certainly one way of doing that.
Cool. So for any viewers watching right now who would like to get started with this type of brain training, like where would you suggest they go?
I would go to on the web. I'd go to Zengar, ZENGAR.com. That is the name of the company. They have on the site locations throughout the world where their practitioners are. And, I don't know how much, I've been out of the business for about a year now, 2 years, how COVID has affected this, because it is a kind of a high contact, and you're actually having to put sensors on people's heads, and you're actually dealing with them. But I'm sure a lot of the practitioners have developed, whatever they need to do, safe practices. But certainly you could find someone within, a certain range of your location to try it out. I would definitely give it a go. It's, like I said, it was one of the most consistent tools that I've ever worked with. It's easy to do, it's easy to administer, and it really does work.
Yeah, so I'll put a link to that down below for anyone who wants to check that out more. And I think now we can get into some more in-depth discussions that I had planned for this interview, a couple other topics. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was friendships. Yesterday I was fortunate enough, I went to the second annual HSP Men's Conference that was hosted by Dr. Tracy Cooper, and I was able to meet a lot of highly sensitive men like myself, which hopefully will be a springboard to future friendships. But I think one thing I really struggle with, or have struggled with, is being vulnerable and being able to show my true self around my close friends who are not highly sensitive men. And, I believe some of this may be stemming from my past experiences, getting bullied by men in my youth, and,
Right.
showing my sensitivity as a young boy. Um, and, obviously these highly sensitive, or these people, these men I'm friends with who are not highly sensitive, they have a lot of masculine energy to them. They're kind of more your traditional, like liking to fix cars and things like that. And sometimes I would say I feel pressure to, for example, curse as much as them or mirror them, say things in a certain way to, avoid showing any awkwardness or sensitivity. So I guess my question is, what advice would you give to me and other highly sensitive men who may be going through this similar type of situation?
Well, first of all, I think we all go through that. I have a lot of friends that are that way as well. One of the things I've noticed about myself, and probably very true for a lot of highly sensitive men, is that we're kind of chameleons. We can adapt to the environment we're in. One of the things we like to avoid is conflict and creating disharmonious situations and so forth. So we tend to adapt to the people that we're around. So like you were saying, these guys may influence how you speak and what you say and that kind of thing. I honestly am starting to find out that I'm having less and less trouble talking about and expressing my sensitivity with other men. I always like to think that at their core there is a little boy in every man. So the man may be physically large and may be big and powerful and strong and dominating and whatever, but underneath it all, there's a little boy there who's just as confused and mixed up as anybody is. And I try to reach out to find that sensitivity within them, because I do think sensitivity is a spectrum. I think we all have a degree of sensitivity, right? And the people that are considered highly sensitive are, of course, at the top end of that. And I think you have some people at the bottom, which may even display some negative sensitivity, but it's still a spectrum of humanity. So I think you can reach out and find those people that may not be highly sensitive. I think you can start reaching and primarily doing this one-on-one. I think we're better at one-on-one kind of things. If we're in a group of men that are all sitting around slugging beers down, watching TV and watching a sports activity or whatever, it may be a little difficult to step up and say, well, I'm a sensitive guy. Can we talk about that? But I think if you isolate some of the people and you start approaching them with things that all of us relate to: emotion, feeling, nurturing, caring, these are human qualities. We all have these qualities. Whether or not men posture with those things or not is not, it does not negate the fact that they're still in there and down there. The other thing I would say is I would just try to seek balance in my friendships too as well. Look for people who are edifying to you, and anybody that's not edifying you. HSPs, we figure that out pretty quickly in a relationship. We know if somebody's edifying us, and helping and giving us positive energy, or whether they're not. And if they're not giving you positive energy, you may want to reevaluate whether you want to be around them. But I would certainly give them the benefit of the doubt. And we need, as highly sensitive men, to start stepping up and talking about the trait to everyone, because there is going to be pushback. There are a lot of men out there who are going to find this offensive. They're going to find it threatening to them to start talking in terms of, our sensitivity and how we express that. But at some point, if we don't talk about it, if we don't step up to this and start educating people about this, I think we're all going to be still living in these caves where we're afraid to come out. And I'm certainly have had experienced that throughout most of my life. But in writing the book and starting to work with talking with other people, I'm starting to realize that it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be in terms of talking to people about it. In fact, I find that a lot of people will say, well, I'm not a highly sensitive person, but I do know somebody who is. My cousin, my uncle, my brother, my father was like that. So you always have that common root, that always that common ground with somebody, because high sensitivity is not an uncommon trait. It's certainly not a dominant trait, but it's not like there's 1 in 10,000 people, you know, it's much more common than that. So my advice to you or any other highly sensitive person that's dealing with men like that is you can be a chameleon and be part of that and participate in that up to the point where you're comfortable. But once it starts becoming uncomfortable, I think you need to reevaluate whether or not this is a good situation for you to be in. And the other thing is to start talking to men about that, and letting them know a little bit more about how you look at things. I think one of the things we have to overcome, Kevin, is this idea that sensitive is a term that needs to be redefined. It has to be reframed. It does not go over well with men. It does not go over well being attributed to men. But in the strictest definition of sensitivity, it is more about sensing and about picking up things and about internalizing things. It is not about emotional overreaction. It's not about being a drama king or queen or whatever. It is about the way we sense the world and how we process that information. So we've got to educate people about what that means.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I will say that I'm not the biggest fan of the term highly sensitive. And I think there are a lot of men out there who are highly sensitive men. I think even a couple I met yesterday who also admitted that, you know, calling this trait high sensitivity, from initial outset, if you're to tell a man you're highly sensitive, they immediately jump back. And because of the, everything that surrounds the word sensitive in a stereotypical sense. But how would you maybe share a bit more about this trait to, let's say, a close friend who may not know about it, without it coming across as if you're being a victim, or you're trying to label yourself, or you're trying to I'm a special type of snowflake type of person, or
Yeah.
like how would you get that across without it coming across as like playing the victim, or
Well, that's something I talk about in the book. I think we can all become victims of our own victimization, right? We can say that, oh, there's so many negative things about that. I see a lot of this in a lot of these Facebook groups and online groups where people are kind of, I hate to put it this way, but they're kind of whining about the trait and the worst qualities of it. They're not looking at it as a whole. When I talk to people about high sensitivity, I try to emphasize the ability for highly sensitive people to nuance things out of the environment, right? In other words, we can see things, feel things that other people are missing because our brains are wired that way. And that kind of makes it so that you're not sort of lording it over somebody else, that I have these great special superpowers you don't have, and so I'm better than you. Or by the same token, you're not going in there whining about the fact that it's just such a burden to be highly sensitive. I think we need to look at it in a positive light. Yes, there's two edges to the sword here, right? There's it can cut both ways. There are things we have to deal with. Our emotions sometimes are deep and very sometimes overwhelming. We do have to have time to recharge, rethink, calm down, that kind of stuff, where a lot of people don't have to deal with that. But I think for the most part, you think about the creative aspect of being a highly sensitive people. Some of our greatest artists and poets and even leaders, thought leaders, counselors, religious leaders, have been highly sensitive people. And these are because they had a gift of being able to do this deep processing, which Dr. Aaron speaks of, that allows us to take data that we take in and crunch it a little bit differently and a little bit more. So I try to pose it as a positive and not a negative, right? And I think that's where the sensitivity, the connotation for sensitivity, especially in men, right? People are more accustomed to associating sensitivity in women, and it's sort of okay because we expect women to be more emotional, which I'm buying into that. I'm just saying that's the kind of general thinking that goes along with this. But for a man to be that way, that's not so good, because they see it as being illogical, emotionally overreactive, and so forth and so on. And that's the thing we need to get our hands around. We need to present the message to people across the personality traits and across whether you're HSP or not, that this is not what we're talking about here. And that's why I said it's going to take time. This may take a long while to get this out there, this message out there, but we got to start doing it now. If Dr. Aaron is correct, and I believe she is, that we're kind of the canary in the coal mine for the human population, that we are evolutionarily designed to be cautious and to be counselors and to bring things up because of our observations and the way we look at things, then we need to get out there and do that. Our world is in a bad place right now on a number of levels. And it is people, especially in the younger generation, and I say that, I almost look at it, and when I say that, it comes out across, because I had heard that when I was younger. But the idea is that I really do believe that people, millennials, especially Gen Zs, and the ones that are coming behind them, are going to be the ones that bring this forward. And that's why I think the message needs to get out there, especially to these younger people and younger men who are struggling with this quality, that it's a good trait, it's a good thing, it's a positive, it's not a negative. And I don't know if in your discussion yesterday whether anybody brought up the idea, should we look to redescribe this as a different term? I wrote somewhere in the book, I like the term highly sensing better than I do high sensitivity. But then again, you know, am I just splitting hairs here? Should we just deal with the term as is and reframe it? And I think, you know, there's arguments that can be made for both things, but I don't think that when Dr. Aaron coined the term that she was meaning for it to be, you know, sort of an expression of over emotionalism. It was about sensation and sensing that I think what she was talking about when she's described sensitivity as that.
Yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, there wasn't any alternate term suggested. Um, but I think it's just about getting over that initial hump of, you know, once you kind of, you know, okay, hey, good friend, I'm highly sensitive, and you mentioned that in a discussion with them, and then once you kind of explain more about what it is, maybe share a link as to, like, so they can read a bit more about it, see that it's actually part of your nervous system being more sensitive, then it kind of takes it to a more practical, they realize it's more of a practical thing and something that is based in science and research. And so let's say there's a man out there who's watching this and he just discovered that he's highly sensitive. How can what are some practical ways that he could, you know, express his sensitivity around his close male friends and really demonstrate that and use those gifts?
Well, I think certainly one of the things is to be sympathetic and nurturing to the people that are around you. You know, if you listen carefully enough, for example, let me just say this. You were talking about walking up to somebody and letting them know. Well, maybe you could find an opportunity, sort of a lead into it. Let's say you're watching a sporting event and one team lost, and you can see one athlete, a big, strong athlete, is there on the sideline. He's got his head in the towel and he's kind of tearful about it. We see that all the time. It could be a lead into talking about sensitivity. Well, this guy is, you know, maybe a star athlete. He's disappointed, obviously, but he doesn't have any inhibition about showing his emotion, right? So maybe it's a good lead into talking about sensitivity. And here's a guy who's an athlete, represents all kinds of masculine traits that our culture defines. Use that as a lead in to talk about sensitivity. You know, sometimes a cold walk into a sort of a cold lead into a discussion, it might not be appropriate, and sometimes it is. But I think what we can do is we can model what sensitivity is, and a lot of times that means you may have to be put in an oppositional place with your peers or people you're talking with to stand up for something. Say for maybe they're talking about a particular group and they're not showing much sympathy towards them, and that kind of stand up and show the other point of view, or show that you can see both sides. a lot of times we are cast in situations where as men, we're supposed to logically figure out problems, right? But sometimes our intuition is our gift as well because of this massive amount of data we take in and the ability to store it and then recall it and put it together in different sort of configurations. That to me is what intuition is about. It's nothing mystical. It's something that's always with us. By demonstrating how you might use that intuition in a problem solving situation. I know you worked in IT, I worked in IT. A lot of times when my natural inclination is to be kind of that intuitive, kind of out of the box thinking kind of person, but when you're doing problem solving in information technology, a lot of times it's just following the line, right? Following the flow chart, going backwards, seeing where the change was, what's different than it was yesterday. But sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes you have to think out of the box. And this is where you can show that by demonstrating your intuition. You stick your neck out, that's for sure, especially in kind of engineering or STEM kind of job, you know, where they're always looking at logic and things like that. But you can do it that way as well. I think more than anything else, again, I emphasize this over and over again, it's about balance. We want to show people balance, that as highly sensitive people, we're balancing the masculine energy and feminine energy. And it's almost a kind of, I even think I had a little chapter in there about androgyny, about how, not in a sexual way, but androgyny and sort of how we balance feminine and masculine energy. Being able to demonstrate that that's not a bad thing, that we can make it useful, that it can be a useful tool to have these characteristics. I like to think of all of that energy, masculine and feminine, as being human energy. And since we're all human, we should be able to express that. And that gets back to having that balance. So, you know, I think the first thing is to embrace your high sensitivity. You have to embrace it as a positive, and it really is. More people that talk about it like you're doing on your podcast, like I'm doing with the book, other books that have been written, and more men are going to write more books. I know that. More men are going to step up. The more we talk about it, the more we can paint it in a positive way. And I think once we embrace that and accept that as something that this is who we are, this is why we're here. You know, according to Dr. Aaron, there is a purpose that nature put us here for. And realizing that we have that kind of high arching purpose, you know, even with our individual purposes, should give us some reason to want to step out and talk about it. It's difficult a lot of times for highly sensitive people to do that because, again, we want harmony, balance. Going out and talking about something like this may put us in a conflictual situation, but we've got to be ready to do that. So having those hacks we talked about, being able to calm yourself down, those things are critical. We have to have those tools to help us to balance that energy so that we can talk about it in a public way. But I am absolutely convinced that this is a movement, this is starting, it's beginning, and it's necessary.
Well, I think it's very encouraging to hear that, you know, at your stage of life, you've kind of gotten to the point where you feel comfortable owning the trait. And
Yes.
I think it's something where maybe just it requires a bit of patience and to let that confidence kind of sink in as it relates to the trait, and kind of once you're aware of it and you start to see through your life circumstances how the strengths of the trait are manifesting, it might become easier to then realize, oh wow, yeah, these are some of my strengths and they're also part of this trait, and I'm using them to really, you know, do positive things. So I think letting some of that build, I think, can really help. And then also, of course, HSPs can sometimes struggle with like assertiveness and things like that. But then once we kind of become more confident in the trait, we'll be able to like be like, yeah, like this is a part of who I am, and you know, I'm proud of it, and you know, it's a good thing, even though there's some weaknesses.
Absolutely. And I think confidence is a big deal. It is a huge deal for highly sensitive men. I mean, for all HSPs, frankly, but for highly sensitive men, confidence is a big deal. And if you weren't taught confidence as a child, you know, you go into life and you're sort of tentative about everything. But you can learn confidence. You can learn to be confident. You can learn to step into your it's like walk with confidence. That's my thing in the book. I want, and I'll elaborate more about that in the second book, but the idea is that we have a walk of confidence, that we walk with who we are, and we're proud of who we are, and we're happy with who we are. And that is so key to being able to be more assertive when we have to be. It doesn't mean being aggressive. See, that's a thing that's often tied with masculinity, is aggression. Assertiveness is a different trait. It's still, it's forceful, it has energy, but it's not the kind of thing that you would expect to see in aggression. Aggression can be violent, aggression can be dominant. Assertiveness is standing firm, it's walking with your confidence, it's walking strong and being strong with who you are. So I think those are the kinds of things that once HSP men begin to start to realize they have this characteristic, that's the next thing they got to work on. That's part of the embracing of the trait, is learning to walk with confidence and to be confident in who you are. Because you will get pushback. I mean, we all have, and it's going to continue. And there's an element of men, I think, are going to be threatened by this. You know, you're trying to make us all feminine. No, I'm not. You have you have feminine energy in you, whether you know it or not. You know, I'm not trying to make, and having feminine energy is not a bad thing. So what you want is balance. I'm not telling you can't be a man. You can be a man. You can be a man in your traditional way as well, but you've got to learn to embrace all of you, your humanness.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly where that balance you talk about between the energies, the masculine and feminine, I think it really applies.
Exactly.
And so the next thing I want to talk about is a bit about like masculinity in general moving forward, because I know in some of your past interviews you talk a bit about like toxic masculinity, and so like while terms like this have kind of come out as a result of the feminism movement, you know, I feel like for any man out there, there's a bit of confusion right now about like who we're supposed to be and really finding our identities, whether they're a traditionally masculine man or a highly sensitive man who wants to, you know, express their traits in a healthy way. So how do you think we can get the world to start talking about high sensitivity in men, much like they do with the feminism movement, let's say, and stop perpetuating some masculine stereotypes that can sometimes come up in pop culture, like TV and movies, and I think really start to take high sensitivity in men as like a serious aspect that might be part of like the broader men's mental health movement, because I think there's some implications there for sure, as like a sensitive man being able to, like, you know, develop that self-esteem. And then you mentioned like anxiety, depression, that's something you talk about in your book. So how do you think that can happen?
Well, it's going to take all of us, and we're all going to have to participate in this at some level. Some people will do it in a much broader sense, where there's probably more visibility. But we certainly can do it at a local level and in our families and in our communities, getting the word out about this. You know, as I was writing the book, Kevin, it started to dawn on me that one of the problems I had was trying to fit into this model of masculinity that I just did not fit into, right? And I started looking at that. Of course, now we're always hearing a lot about toxic masculinity. I think we see it a lot in sort of corporate policies. We see it in government. We see it, you know, in athletics. We see it in a whole bunch of different places. And it's not just women that are being affected by this. It's men too. Men are having, you know, troubles trying to deal with this idea of being this idealized male, or being the dominant person, or being the dominant male, and subjecting other people to sort of a submissive state. It works for a few, you know, maybe the lead at the top who can get away with this, but it doesn't work for the most of men that are out there. So I started to realize that, you know, this isn't about just being HSP. I mean, we were affected. You said bullying happened to you when you were growing up, and you know, I kind of fortunate. I was a tall kid. I'm kind of skinny and tall, but people didn't bully me so much. But I had a few people that did bully me at a verbal level, you know, and I know what that experience is like. this is a time to open up the hood about what being a man is, what being masculine is. We are changing as a culture. It's so obvious. And yes, the feminist movement has been a part of that for the last 40, 50 years, but we're starting to see other groups come forward. The LGBTQ community is questioning gender identity. They're questioning what it means to be male, female, and sort of the binary way we look at gender identity. So as I was writing the book, it became this thing sort of started coming to me about the idea that this is not just about highly sensitive men. It's something that highly sensitive men can participate in, and that is redefining what masculinity is, so that we fit a broader definition of what masculinity is. But as I was writing, I also realized too that we're talking about humanity. If we're going to open up the definitions that we have traditionally had, and we're going to change things, and we're going to be more inclusive and more accepting of people, then we need to talk about what it is to be human, what it is to be a human being. These characteristics that we've taken that kind of binary role. Men do this, women do this, that's it. There's no in between, there's nothing that you either fit in there or you're going to fail. That definition has got to stop. I really think it's killing men, especially men over the age of 50, who are a demographic in which suicides are going up at an alarming rate. Men have been told, socialized, not to be able to express their emotions, not to be able to show vulnerability, not to be able to do things that we consider to be feminine. And again, these are cultural things. These are not personal things I feel or you feel. These are cultural things that have been handed down to us. We need to redefine that. And sometimes I think that having the pendulum swing too far left or right, back and forth, is not always the best way. Again, it comes back to this idea of balance. Can we get back into a state of balance? Can we get back to a state of harmony where we can be human first, and then certain characteristics will be associated with men, certain characteristics may be associated with women, but if they go back and forth, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Some people are not going to fit into this little binary definition of what gender role models are. So going forward, I really think that highly sensitive men can be role models. I think we can be thought leaders. I think we can be models for other men, especially for other highly sensitive men, and how to live our lives as being more human, more balanced by the energy of the feminine and masculine, and show people that you're not going to implode because you're not following the exact man code as it was defined 3,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago or whenever it was defined. We can change that, and we need to do that. Look at the state of the planet. Look at how we have taken that sort of masculine energy to destroy our climate. Look at how we have created the state of inequality because we are trying to submit other people to this sort of submissive state where they're not getting a fair shake. All those things relate back, I think, to that whole idea of hegemonic masculinity, which is sort of like a small elite group of predominantly white men are making all the decisions for everybody out there. And I think that's going to have to be looked at.
Mm-hmm. And how would you respond to someone who, let's say, maybe points to biology and they say, biologically men are supposed to be this traditional way and that applies to all men because it's in like our genetics?
I'm not discounting that. I'm not saying that there are not things that men will do because of biology, okay, or because of hormones that men have, or dominant hormones that men have, or women for that matter. We do have different roles to serve from a strictly biological standpoint, right? If you just look at it from the biology standpoint, men do have one activity to perform and women have another activity to perform in order to reproduce and create offspring, right? And I talk about that part of the book and I call it the primal objective, what that way deep down inside of us drive to do this one thing, which is to reproduce our genes and perpetuate our genetic information going forward. But we live in a world where people don't follow those traditional biology roles. Biology doesn't have to dictate what we do in a more higher level consciousness or a higher level way of defining how we want to live our lives. You know, it doesn't, just because we have these biological instincts, that doesn't mean that one, you have to reproduce, one, that you have, two, that you have to have kids and raise them and that kind of thing. So we don't have to be slaves to these dictates that biology gives us. But there are going to be people who will argue that, well, because men have more testosterone, they're going to be more aggressive, they're going to get into more, you know, physical activity and do this kind of thing. And there may be some truth to that, but again, I don't think that has to dictate to us how everybody has to live. And I think we should be looking at expanding some of those definitions, because we're much more complicated than just a simple biological organism.
Mm-hmm. And just to echo your point there, I did mention in my last interview that I did that, you know, there's these positive masculine traits that are maybe more biologically driven, like having responsibility or, yeah, I guess being noble, being able to care for, let's say, and love your partner, love your children, care for them. And I think there's nothing stopping from highly sensitive men from embodying these types of traits.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I think, and that's something I would say to all the traditional masculine people who would argue for that, is that, you know, highly sensitive men can still be men. It's just they embody their own set of traits to kind of be responsible or to love their partner or to raise their children. And I think having that uniqueness and that kind of balance, as you said, is very important.
Yeah, I think the key thing here to remember is this, is that, yeah, there's nothing wrong with a man wanting to be a protector for his family. There's nothing wrong for a man, because I think that's an element of nurturing, right? You want to be there for them, to support them and help them and that kind of thing. And some of these traits may in fact have some, you know, source at the Y chromosome. I don't know, but the point I'm making is this: is there's a whole lot of other things that are being suppressed in men because they have to be the one who has all the answers. They have to be the one who is the absolute protector. They're the one who has to be the breadwinner. They have to take the lead on everything. This is the kind of thinking that kills men in the end. Because the fact is, if you're not vulnerable at some point, you don't realize at some point, I don't have all the answers. My partner might have the answers. And if my partner is female, so be it. If she can take the lead someplace, then fine, let her do that, right? And not feel less of a man because of that, right? You're a partner. It's kind of in a partnership here where you're both contributing, you're both adding, you know, to each other and to into the household that you are managing. It's a partnership. Make it so, you know, and if that means that you become less dominant a little bit of the time, that's fine. And if your partner wants to be dominant, that's that balance. Again, it goes back to balance. And I think a lot of times men really want to be caught in sort of these boxes that say, this is what a man's supposed to be, and I have to be this way all the time. And I can never deviate from that. So that's my argument to people who say, well, you're trying to make men effeminate. Well, that's BS. I'm not trying to make men effeminate. I'm trying to expand their humanness by embracing some of that feminine energy. That's not a sexual thing, right? It's not a sexual thing. I think a lot of men get hung up on that. They think it sexualizes them into being less than a man, right? When it's not. It's an energy. It's not the physical presentation of your body, right? And that's where I think so many men get lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely some important things to keep in mind, I think. But we are kind of nearing the hour mark, so I just wanted to segue into a bit of a conclusion here. And so I did want to ask you, like, obviously you've had a lot of life experience, you've gone through that realization and transformation, you've done a lot of things to help HSP men. Um, so what kind of words of wisdom would you leave a highly sensitive man who's watching this video, um, and really wants to develop that confidence in themselves and really accept themselves?
Well, one thing I would say is if I can develop the confidence in this, then anybody can. Any HSP male can do that. I think it's the best time in the history of the planet to be an HSP male. I think it's a time when I think the awareness is increasing. I think we have a purpose and we have something to step up to. And it's all going to be good. It's all going to be okay. I think a lot of HSP men live in isolation with their trait and they don't really know what to do with it. Now that there are more and more people such as yourself and myself stepping up, and Tracy Cooper and what he's doing, Ted Zepp and what he did while he was still with us, is bringing that awareness up. So recognize that awareness is power in that awareness. And I think it's a good time to be a highly sensitive male. And I think we'll all start gelling around this idea that it's a positive trait. We've got some things to contribute to the world, and the world needs us right now. And you as an HSP are a part of that.
Yeah. The more HSP men realize about the trait and then start embodying it and sharing with the world, I think it'll turn into an army of HSP men who will hopefully be propagating the message. Absolutely. And so we're obviously going to put a link to Bill's book in the description below, but aside from that, is there any other places my audience can go to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, I'm just starting to pick up on the blog again. I've got a couple of interesting blog articles I'm going to write in the near future, very soon. And that's at thesensitiveman.com. That's the website. And I'm going to do kind of a restack on the website soon, so it'll be a little bit more functional for other things. I'm on Facebook as The Sensitive Man, and on Twitter as The Sensitive MA1. I didn't get Sensitive Man, so I got MA1 instead. But anyway, I'm out there as well, and ZLNW on Instagram. So if you want to follow me, great. I hopefully will be able to continue passing along what I'm learning as I'm going along, and realize this is a learning process. You never stop learning. That's the beauty of all this. And even at 65, there's so many things I still have to learn about this trait and its characteristic and about myself. We can all learn this together. We can all grow together. Cool.
So I'll put all those links in the description below if you guys want to check Bill out. And yeah, and we may be doing a part 2 in the future, so you can maybe look forward to that. So
I would love to do it.
Yeah, but aside from that, I just want to thank you, Bill, for coming on today. It's definitely been very, very helpful hearing your insight.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate what you're doing. Continue the good work, and as they say, keep the faith. Keep realizing that this is only going to grow.
Absolutely. So thanks again, and take care.
Okay, you too.
Bye. So I really hope you found that interview helpful. And if you did, please leave a like on this video. And if you want to see more interviews like this one, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell to stay notified of these new videos. And also, I want to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comments below if there's any guests you want me to have on the channel, or any topics you'd like to see discussed more in these highly sensitive men interviews. So until next time, guys, I'll see you in the next video, and take care.